This was my dream table saw, a 3 horsepower 220 volt saw stop with all the bells and whistles. It cost $6,000. It was 6 months old and in perfect condition until a water leak. Now it's covered in rust, the cabinet is holding water, and I have no idea if I can salvage it or even if it'll turn on. In a few hours, movers are coming to take everything out of my shop so we can repair the water damage, and before they take it for a month, this is my last chance to see if I can stop the damage and restore the cast iron. I fear that the rust has caused massive pitting and staining already, and I don't know if this is even worth it. If you've ever seen tools in this condition and wondered if they can be saved, join me in the gut-wrenching work of trying to save your favorite tool. No, I don't think this is going to work. The first order of business is to try to get down to bare metal. And one way you can do that is using reconditioning oil. Some people use WD-40. I'm gonna test both of those. And Carbon Method sends you an assortment of polishing pads and abrasive pads that you can cut to the size of your random orbital sander. You don't need to go all crazy and cut these into a circle. Just cut them into a square, put them on, and get to work. Only idiots would take the time to painstakingly cut these into a circle. Yeah, I cut them into a circle because I have problems. It's probably best to let this reconditioning oil soak for a while. I didn't do that because I was anxious to try to get this clean. And I will say at this point, my anxiety was at an all-time high because this looks terrible. I mean, it would look great. It kind of looks nice and pleasing and even if you were refinishing furniture for someone who loved the shade of orange. I mean, there's a presidential joke in there somewhere that I'm gonna stay far away from, but that's not what you want to see on your cast iron. And when I tried to rub it off, the haze just would not go away. I would be lying if I said I was not heartbroken and very worried at this point. Not only because of the haze, but because of the staining that I can see there. I was convinced there was no way to get the staining out. I did several passes with a maroon pad and reconditioning oil, and I just kept wiping the stuff off. And I got to this stage where I was glad to see some metal and it shining, but uh-oh. Yeah, here's a tip I learned: to regularly empty the pad on a scrap piece of wood so that you don't keep reintroducing the rust. But eventually I got it pretty clean, but look at that staining. I mean, it looks better than rust, but just knowing that a few days ago it was brand new metal crushes me. On this middle section, I decided to try WD-40 because everyone will comment on this video, just use WD-40. So here you go. And I want to see if there's a noticeable difference between using WD-40 and reconditioning oil. Spoiler alert, there wasn't much of a difference, but I can show you one spot in a little bit where the reconditioning oil did beat out the WD-40. The one thing I did notice with the WD-40 is it did tend to sling around a lot, where the reconditioning oil seemed to stay on the pad and soak in the pad and not fling around. On this side wing, I used WD-40 for the first pass, and at this point, I am in full-on denial that I'm going to need to take that wooden wing off and even the fences. I am still having an emotionally hard time accepting the fact that I'm doing this to a new saw. There's some aggressive rust spots on the middle of this surface and on the edge that I could not get to come out with WD-40. So I switched to the reconditioning oil here and went after it with the sander. In this close-up shot, you can see these rust spots that are proud of the surface and will not come off. I've tried several attempts with WD-40 and with reconditioning oil with the power sander, and I mean, that's what the metal used to look like right there where the fence used to be. And let me know in the comments if this hurts your heart as much as it hurts, but I know this is just stuff, but it just hurts. So in one last ditch effort, what I'm going to do here is soak these areas with the reconditioning oil and try again. And here's what happened. You see this little spot right there? It's raised, and I try to use WD-40, it won't come out. I'm gonna try this. Oh my gosh, check it out. It's gone. Oh wow, okay. Crazy. So that spot would not come out with WD-40 and the sander, but with reconditioning oil and a pad, and I had a fresh pad on there. Wow, so it does lubricate it better. Impressive. I eventually came to terms with the fact that I'm going to have to do some surgery on the saw, and there was no way around dealing with this warped wooden wing. So after taking off a lot of the bolts, I was able to pry it out, and unfortunately there's no way that this piece can be saved. It is complete trash. Now with the wing off, I am taking a hard look at the edges of the saw and how much rust dripped down. I'm still trying to tell myself that I'm not going to have to take off the wings or the brackets or the fence or anything like that. The staining looks like a Damascus steel effect. It's completely smooth. There are no protrusions or pitting. This is just cosmetic staining. And if you look at that bottom corner, you can see like what the metal used to look like. And it's just crazy that within, I guess, a couple of days in high humidity in this garage, that this much damage occurred. I did not put carbon coat on this fence rail. I wish I did, because there's this little sticker basically that is metal. It's not very deep, and it got beat up pretty bad. With reconditioning oil and a maroon pad, I was able to salvage it. It's smooth, it's just still ugly. At this point, I really have no hope that the staining on this top will improve, and I'm staring down the reality that I'm going to have to break out the toolbox and take off the outfeed table and the rails and lose whatever calibration I had. I think if there's any hope of saving this saw, I'm going to have to deal with all of the rust around all of the corners. It was clear to me that if I was going to get any of the staining out, the maroon pad just wasn't going to cut it. It did a great job, but at 300-ish grit, I needed something a little bit more aggressive. Out of desperation, I grabbed 120 grit sandpaper, hoping that I can get down into the metal a little bit more. Before I show you the result, I'm interested if you think sanding this will improve the staining. Let me know in the comments below. I eventually came to terms with the fact that I'm going to have to disassemble all of these rails, and it wasn't too bad, but I just hated doing it. But I'm glad I did, because of all of this rust that was on all these parts. It just needed to be dealt with if there's any hope of saving this saw. Luckily on the powder coating, it came right off without any damage, and I was able to take the sander with the 120 grit sandpaper to the edge and clean up a lot of it. There's still some stains, but there's no pitting. And at the end of the day, this is just a functional edge of the table saw that you're really not going to see. I'm doing one last pass with reconditioning oil and sandpaper, working my way up to 180 and 220 grit so that I can take the maroon pad and the gray pad and the white pad up to a polishing stage. I still don't have a lot of hope at this point. I mean, this it looks terrible still. I mean, it's not as bad as orange, but it's still heartbreaking. If you are interested in what happened to my shop and what I could have done to avoid this entire disaster, I have a video coming out soon detailing what happened, what I had in place that saved it from being far worse, and what I wish I had in place that would have saved this from even happening. I would love it if you would consider subscribing so that you don't miss it. Please consider sharing this video and the videos that come out forthcoming. Now, in this final step before the table saw goes off to storage for a little bit, I wanted to put some carbon coat on there. I'm going to show you how you do it. This is a graphene nano coating. You don't need a whole lot of it, but you basically draw a little box on the pad, and then you draw what's called a well line, which most of the material is going to come off on this first pass. Okay, Festool, we get it. We get that you want to be in focus, but this video isn't about you. I apologize for the autofocus. But you draw this well line, and then you draw all that material off in the other direction, and you kind of keep going in 90-degree patterns for about a minute or so, and you'll feel the carbon coat tack up. You'll start to feel the friction. Now, this is not the greatest tutorial visually because of the autofocus and everything. I have a video on my other channel that I'll link below if you want to see like a full-on tutorial within a few minutes on how to do this properly. It's a way better video than this one, but I want to show you just kind of what I'm doing here. I applied 3 coats of carbon coat on the entire saw, buffed out in between, and to my surprise, I can't believe it. I don't understand it, but it subdued a lot of the staining. And if you get up close, you can still see that there's staining. There's no hiding it, but it's not near what it was before the carbon coat. I don't understand how this works. And if you were to look at the saw from far away, you wouldn't even know that there was a water event. It looks like a gently used saw stop. Now, it doesn't look like a new one like it did, but it doesn't look orange. I don't get it. I seriously don't know how it's doing this, but before, all I know is before the carbon coat, it looked worse. In here, it's like knocked everything back. Still there, but it knocked it all back. Now, for those of you who are saying, well, you had carbon coat on there before, I can't believe it did that much damage, I want to show you something. The table saw took direct water for, I think, a few days in 100-degree heat in my garage. My thermostat said 80% humidity. But next to my table saw was my jointer that only got splashed off of the table saw, and it only had wax. And I did the same restoration process that I showed you and put carbon coat on the jointer just now, and you can see the staining is much more severe. This is different steel, obviously. It's a different tool, obviously. But it is interesting to me that this tool only had wax and it got splashed on, and this is the depth of the staining. Where the table saw had carbon coat, took the hit, and the staining wasn't as severe. Now, we've been able to salvage the top of the table saw, but the electronics, I'm not so sure. So I'm gonna get a swimming pool and fill it up with rice and toss the table saw in it for a month. I'll let you know how it works.